We're back for the final installment of the Texas schedule breakdown. The final stretch should be the toughest part of the season, so what are we up against? And can Texas beat their 9.5 win projection? Paul Wadlington, Texas and Big 12 analyst at Inside Texas, gives us the outlook on those final 5 games in the Big 12 Conference. You already know Inside Texas is the place to constantly get your Texas football fix. Subscribe to InsideTexas.com today. Link in the description. These final games will make or break the Texas season. Can Sark finally get over that 10-win mark? Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, Paul, let's hit the remainder of the season, and I think this final stretch is where Texas will be really tested. After finally giving up their independent status, Texas is hosting BYU, and they can be a tricky team for us. The official over-under is at 5.5 wins for the Cougars. Do you think they can outperform that in their first year in the league, or do they ultimately fall short of that 5.5?
So the BYU Cougars, if you're a Texas fan, I'll allow all of you to have a brief Taysom Hill flashback. Now that that nightmare is over, let's move forward and talk about the actual BYU team that Texas will play in Austin. Kalani Sitake is the head coach, and interestingly enough, BYU last year really lived on their offense. And traditionally, they've been more of a defensive team till Zach Wilson came around and reintroduced the BYU Cougar tradition of great offense. Last year, the offense was pretty darn good with Jaron Hall, who's now gone on to the NFL. But the defense was a huge disappointment. So Sitake fired his defensive coordinator. He's going to rethink and basically regroup on defense. And he's going to need that because one of the traditional areas where BYU has struggled is typically not in the trenches. They typically have the offensive line and defensive line and the physicality to hang with the bigger schools. Traditionally, BYU, when they do struggle against the bigger schools, it's team speed. And I think that's an issue that they're going to have to address in the secondary. I do like their wide receiver group. I think it's one of the most underrated wide receiver groups in the country. And if Pt.2, who's now at his third school, the former USC one-year Pitt quarterback, he's now at BYU. And if he can return to USC form, particularly 2019 USC form, BYU's offense is going to be much better than people think. However, I sort of am in prove-it mode on defense. I do think BYU probably is going to be the most competitive of the 4 new entrants to the Big 12. I don't think the over on that number is a stretch. So I'd advise any bettors and Texas prognosticators to be a little bit wary of betting on that number until you hear a little bit more about fall camp and specifically how Pt.2 is performing at quarterback.
I'm excited to play the new guys, but now is where the tough stretch begins in my mind with Kansas State, but we do have them at home. They're returning a decent amount on offense, but they're 94th in returning defensive production. Regardless, the odds makers like K-State at 8.5 wins, so what's your pick on that?
Kansas State Wildcats, returning Big 12 champions. How do you like that? Chris Klieman has been vindicated. He's done a wonderful job coaching. In fact, the state of Kansas is currently the cradle of coaching in the Big 12 with Klieman and with Leipold out there getting it done. Kansas State, there's a lot to like about them, but they do have a few fatal flaws. So think about that before you aggressively bet that over. Let me lead with some of the things that you got to like about Kansas State. One, they're really well coached. I mentioned Chris Klieman. He does a very good job of managing the game. He's a strong play caller. He's a maximizer. Will Howard, talk about a guy who had a transformation. He was a sub-average quarterback for most of his career. He ends up replacing Adrian Martinez and absolutely plays lights out, particularly as a deep ball passer. He really opened up the Kansas State offense and was instrumental in helping them win the Big 12 title. Of course, he returns. And then they returned 5 offensive linemen led by guard Cooper Beebe, who might be the best run blocking guard in the entire Big 12. Although they do lose Deuce Vaughn, who is one of the most remarkable players to ever play in the Big 12, they do replace him with a very good player in Florida State transfer running back Treshaun Ward. So not a lot is being talked about with regards to Mr. Ward, but if you want to lay down a bet for him to break 1,000 yards rushing, I think that's a safe bet given the environment and ecosystem that he's going to thrive in. Where Kansas State really distinguished themselves last year and where they really have to fill some massive holes is on defense, specifically their secondary and their pass rush. Of course, they lose Felix Azumoa, who was their best pass rusher. He's going to be playing in the NFL and earning a big paycheck on Sundays. But I'd say an equal loss is that they had their secondary effectively devastated. They lost both starting corners, one of whom is going to be an NFL starter, and Julius Brents. They also lost two of their safeties or three of their safeties, depending on how you want to count it. One of those players to the NFL. They have to completely rework their secondary. And I'm not sure that they're going to have a very viable pass rush without blitzing linebackers. Typically, when Kansas State takes a step back on defense, even when they're good on offense, Kleiman has to play a lot more ball control. And he's trying to win games 31-28, trying to win games 31-30. He's trying to shorten the game, protect his defense, and make sure that his offense is controlling tempo. Kansas State is going to do that successfully in the vast majority of games against the most of the opponents they play. However, when they play a very good opponent, particularly the Texases and whoever else emerges, I think they're going to really struggle to overcome those defensive losses. I like Kansas State probably for the over, but I don't have a really strong feeling that they're absolutely going to decimate that number. I think you're to be sweating that bet until the final game of the season.
And then we have a tough road game that follows with TCU, but they're 118th in the nation in returning production and 130th on offense, so they lost almost the entirety of their offensive success from last season. Recency bias says they'll be good if you ask the national guys, but Vegas has them at 7.5 wins. Where do you stand on TCU this season?
Las Vegas has the TCU Horned Frogs at 7.5 wins. And that had to be a big surprise to all the national sports writers who currently have them as a top 15 football team. Well, the reason for that is Las Vegas is comprised of sharps who actually have consequences for their opinions. Sports writers get to lazily predict that the team that played in the national championship must be pretty good and they're not going to fall off that much. Well, I think you need to look at what Vegas does and pay attention to them a lot more than the sports writers. The TCU Horned Frogs, hats off to them. It was a wonderful 2022. They went 13-2. They finished second in the final coaches poll. And even though they had a brutal thrashing at the hands of the Georgia Bulldogs in the title game, 65-7. Hey, they made it there and they upset Michigan. That gets to go on their wall forever. But I think TCU is going to have a reality check. And the interesting thing about that reality check is it's going to take a little while for it to happen. They have a very easy non-conference, and they have a very favorable early Big 12 conference schedule. In fact, I think it's quite probable that they start the year something like 5-1. And then I think they're going to go on a losing streak starting in late October. That is going to be a shock to everyone but folks listening to this video who are informed enough about this football program. The fact is, you cannot lose 8 players to the NFL draft if you're a TCU level program and feel like they're just not going to miss a beat. To include their starting quarterback, 3 of their 4 best players on defense. They do return Josh Newton, the standout corner, and nickel, who's going to be a great player. Just every consequential player that basically made them a really good football team. I don't think TCU is going to rebound anyway close to what they did in 2022. Now, that 7.5 win line is very sharply set. I think a lot of people are going to rush to bet the over. I think that's bait for a lot of folks who are lazy, who think surely TCU is not going to fall from grace this much. I would not bet this, but if I were going to bet it, just because I'm a complete hater and I'm fading the TCU Horned Frogs, I guess I'd probably go with the under.
I can see them going over 8 wins, but I don't see how they can recreate last year's success, losing all those NFL guys and their offensive coordinator. And then we have to travel to Ames to face a down but scrappy Iowa State. Vegas has their win projection at 5.5, so are you going over or under?
The Iowa State Cyclones, they have fallen from grace, as has Matt Campbell over the last 2 years. They've had 2 straight years of relative disappointment, with last year being the peak. The Cyclones went 4-8 and drew this distinction of being the best 4-8 football team in America. They lost 5 or 6 of their games by a score or less and played several very good teams down to the very last minute in the Big 12. The problem with Iowa State, of course, is that they had an absolutely miserable offense. Although Hunter Deckers gets a lot of the blame, and that's not without some merit, a big part of that was the fact that Iowa State absolutely could not run the ball. They had a horrid running game. They had terrible run blocking. They don't have dynamic ball carriers. And deprived of play action, the Matt Campbell offense simply doesn't work. They also lost basically everything wideout Xavier Hutchinson to the NFL. And though they do return Hunter Deckers, and Deckers, I think, will be an improved player, unless they can clean up that offense, unless they can find some way to run the ball, I don't think they're going to improve all that much on offense. Now, in terms of defense, they lose some dudes. Will McDonald was an absolute stud. I think he'll actually, in some ways, be put a more productive player in the NFL than even in college because of how he was schemed and used. They lose a very good, underrated safety in Anthony Johnson. And of course, Cyclones also are losing a fair number of high-level contributors who were just good guys who made them have the number one defense in the Big 12. Now, I don't think Iowa State's defense is going to fall off because they're so well coached, they're so well schemed, but I don't think they're going to be quite as good as last year. Now, are they going to be as miserable and endure another season like last year? I don't think they will, but I don't think they're going to necessarily blow up and be the conference dark horse either. I think Iowa State's going to struggle to win 5 or 6 games. I think they're going to be in a lot of games. I don't think anyone really wants a piece of them in Ames, but ultimately, I just don't see the players there. You really have to take a pretty big leap of faith to think that Matt Campbell is going to restore the program to where it was without some evidence. They've been on a little bit of a slide, and unless they can address some of the fundamental issues that really drive that program, I just don't see a ton of upside for them. To me, this line is a giant stay away. Ultimately, if you do believe in Matt Campbell, bet the over, but that's not a bet I'm very eager to make.
I thoroughly do not enjoy playing Iowa State. They always find a way to drag teams down into the mud. And then for the grand finale, Texas Tech comes to Austin for our final Big 12 game after a disappointing loss last season. The odds makers have their over-under at 7.5 wins. How do you think it'll go for the Red Raiders in year 2 under McGuire?
Ladies and gentlemen, a golf clap for Mr. Joey McGuire, whose debut 5-4 Big 12 record was the first winning conference mark in Lubbock since Mike Leach's last year in Lubbock. Between 2010 and 2021, the Raiders were an execrable 36-71 in conference play, posting 0 winning tallies in conference action while earning a goose egg in top 25 finishes. This has been a horrific fall from grace from a program that used to pride itself on always being very respectable and always foisting big upsets on people in Lubbock. Joey McGuire did it not just harnessing a bunch of guys playing hard, but also by playing effectively money ball football. Joey McGuire was the guy who viewed 3rd and 8 at the 50-yard line as 2-down territory. Joey McGuire is the guy on defense who says, rather than let you run the ball up the middle against our base defense on 3rd and 2, we're going to play press coverage. We're going to put an extra man in the box, and we're going to make you prove that you can hit a 60-yard touchdown over the top, because otherwise we're going to stuff your run. We're going to get the ball back, and we're going to go score. Joey McGuire won some games that Texas Tech should not have won because of the way he coached. And I think it's going to take a little while for other Big 12 coaches to catch up to that. I also like what Texas Tech returns. They went 8-5 last year, and they ended the season on a 4-0 run, including an absolute hiding of Ole Miss in a bowl game. Now, in true SEC tradition, Ole Miss put out word quickly that they were disinterested in the game and didn't really care. But nonetheless, I watched the game and I saw what happened. Ole Miss got pushed around and beaten up by Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech is going to be a good football team. Now, I don't think they're going to be a great football team. I don't know what upside they have, but I think their floor is really solid. So for that reason, I like the over. And if they can beat Oregon, who travels down to the Plains for the second game of in September, if they can win that game and in a big upset, I think your victory on that over bet is all but assured. I like Texas Tech. I like the direction of the program. I like the fact that Tyler Shuck seems to have finally grown into some of his abilities as a quarterback. I like the backup Baron Morton if they have to go there. All in all, I think it's a balanced football team. I think it's a well-coached football team. And I think this is a team with some belief. So I think it's good that Texas gets them in Austin. And I think Texas may have something for them for the season finale. But I expect Texas Tech to have already acquired their 8th win before they get down to Austin.
Yeah, Tech is headed in the right direction. And last, we have the Texas Longhorns. Vegas has our over-under sitting at 9.5 wins. Does Texas secure the over with a 10-win season, and then all is right in the world?
Texas Longhorns are a 9.5 win projection. That's a team that's playing a one of the harder Big 12 schedules on a relative basis. I do think the Big 12 is going to be down overall, but also seemingly a guaranteed loss for a road game, a night game in Tuscaloosa, at least based on the current Vegas betting odds. I like the over. But before I explain why I do like the over for Texas, let me explain why Texas might hit the under. Texas hasn't won a conference title since 2009. Texas hasn't had great success recently at all. And Steve Sarkisian, the head coach, after 10 years as a head coach, has never won double-digit games. So if you're a big trend bettor, the bet is obvious. You take the under, you fade Texas hard, and you say underachieving Texas won't get it done. However, if you're cursed with the desire to analyze everything as if every season is new, and you actually look at the Big 12 and you look at the players that Texas has, and you look at the depth, and you look at the roster that they've built, you look at the people that they brought in the portal strategically, I like Texas. And the reason is the Longhorns are the most balanced, best overall football team in the Big 12. And with all due respect to Rice and Wyoming, I consider those wins. And I don't think that Alabama's got a guaranteed win in Tuscaloosa the way so many people and even Vegas are projecting. I think that game is going to be a dogfight. And if Texas wins that game, assuming there's no other dramatic bad luck or injury or something like that, I think Texas goes ahead and eclipses that 9.5 mark. Now, I will say that is a properly set line. I'd say the fat part of the bell curve is for Texas to win 9 or win 10. Depends on really your coin flip. However, I think the ability to hit ceiling actually outpaces the ability to hit floor. And what I mean by that is I think it's more likely that Texas actually wins 11 or possibly even 12 games rather than completely fades and only wins 7. So if you factor that in, I'm going to be an optimist and bet the Longhorns to do the over. You do you, but ultimately, I think Texas is the class of the Big 12.
You got me hype over here, man. And all right, brother, thank you for dropping knowledge as usual. And please tell the viewers where to read up on all your latest articles.
Well, if you like the reckless Kool-Aid of the burnt orange variety that I just dispensed to everyone, you can find me at Inside Texas along with some other really, really talented people. It's the best website out there, not only covering Texas sports, but I think college football. Meet us, join us at Inside Texas, and join the conversation.
And that's a wrap on Paul Wadlington. Head over to Inside Texas and sign up today. Thanks for hanging out. Watch some more of my videos here. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want to support quality Texas content. As always, hook on.